We didn't have a declaration of war in Vietnam. We should have. You don't need a declaration of war to respond to an attack by a terrorist operation funded by another country. You can if you wish, but it's certainly not a constitutionally compelled step that you have to take. And there's not a single framer who would have believed it was. Now, Bernie Sanders is a Marxist lowlife. He is a self-hating Jew. He is not a Jew of faith. He's a Jew of birth. I've talked about this before. How on the left, wittingly or unwittingly, they bifurcate ethnicity from faith. And in fact, those secular Jews, like secular Catholics, secular anything, they condemn Jews who follow their faith, particularly Orthodox Jews. They call them extremists and radicals, and they're in the Netanyahu government. They're extremists and radicals, and they support apartheid. Bernie Sanders hates this country. Bernie Sanders, if he could, would burn down our entire country and replace it with his Marxist nirvana, which we all know would mean prison camps, mass murder, centralized destruction, an economy where people starve and can't feed themselves. That's the natural, logical end to what this man preaches, whether he wants to hear it or not, whether he likes it or not. So why do networks like MSNBC and CNN in particular keep giving him a platform? Jake Tapper, another self-hater, keeps giving guys like Bernie Sanders a platform to spew their bigotry, to spew their hate for the state of Israel, to accuse Israel of killing all these civilians and demanding a two-state solution like that's going to fix something. You know, the Confederacy was about a two-state solution to slavery. That's why those states broke off. Did Abraham Lincoln say, we need a two-state solution in order to limit civilian deaths, American deaths on both sides? Did the northern media at the time say we need a two-state solution? No, they said no. We got to end slavery and keep this country together. And it doesn't matter how many people die, warriors and civilians alike, it must be done. Two-state solution. Can you imagine if Joe Biden were president during the Civil War? America would look nothing like it does today, and slavery would persist in the South. That's just a fact. It's a fact. So here you have two self-haters going at it. Again, the distinction between ethnicity and faith. Go ahead.
Today marks 100 days since the brutal Hamas attacks on Israel. Here in the United States, divisions over the war that Israel launched that day are only growing. Joining me now, Independent Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont.
So Israel launched the war that day. Israel launched the war that day? No, Hamas launched the war. Israel's defending itself. And of course, this really tells you what's about to happen. Go ahead.
Of Vermont. Senator, thanks again for joining. We have a lot to get to, but first let's start with this dramatic new escalation in the Middle East. President Biden strikes against the Iranian-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen. Top House progressive.
Don't you find it interesting? He says there's an escalation in the Middle East, and even though Biden's response is impotent, he talks about Biden's hitting the Houthis. That's an escalation. Not the Houthis hitting us, grabbing one of our tankers, shooting at ships, freighters and others, including our Navy, by the way. No. Iran's not escalating it. We are. And that's my point. In a sense, they're right, because Biden's ineffective response to Iran and his comment, we don't want to go to war with Iran. You let them guess. You don't start telling them what we don't want to do and all the rest. You make them fear you. That's the only way they'll respect you. It's Iran. We've had half a century of experience with Iran now. And so the combination of Iran, extremely aggressive, a terrorist war government, fundamentalists, and the weakest commander-in-chief one could ever recall, making all the wrong decisions. All the wrong decisions. That's why, quote-unquote, war in the Middle East is expanding. Go ahead.
Congresswoman Jayapal said the president should have gotten and, in fact, needed permission from Congress, calling the strikes an unacceptable violation of
Jayapal, who is also a Marxist, I think she represents Seattle, she says that the president needs to get a declaration of war authorization from Congress. No, he doesn't. We not only have the War Powers Act that takes this into consideration, with the Supreme Court upheld, but we've had battles which haven't required a declaration of war since the beginning of this republic. So what are you going to do? You're going to have a declaration of war against the Houthis? What does that entail? What does that mean? No, of course not. You know, there was a debate about all this commander-in-chief stuff by your framers of the Constitution, which, of course, none of these reprobates are knowledgeable about, including the isolationists in the Republican Party and the radical leftists in the Democrat Party. They debated this issue, and they decided that Congress was incapable of making war decisions that needed to be made at a moment's notice. So they created a little bit of a rub. The commander-in-chief is the president. They didn't say he's only commander-in-chief when he gets permission from Congress to act. He's the commander-in-chief, the executive branch. He's the commander-in-chief. Separation of powers. Congress declares wars. So the question is, when do you go to Congress as a commander-in-chief to declare war? Well, I would suggest if you have 50,000 troops going into a war zone, you need a declaration of war. That's my suggestion. We didn't have a declaration of war in Vietnam. We should have. And there's other major wars where we didn't. That's different from this. You don't need a declaration of war to respond to an attack by a terrorist operation funded by another country. You can if you wish, but it's certainly not a constitutionally compelled step that you have to take. And there's not a single framer who would have believed it was. And by framer, I mean not only the men who were in Philadelphia, but I mean those who voted to ratify the Constitution. They understood that you need somebody to make the decision, and they put it in the Constitution. Now, it doesn't mean that Joe Biden's a good commander-in-chief. He's an idiot. But we don't interpret the Constitution based on an idiot. So you can oppose what Joe Biden's doing and how he's doing it, but you don't need to pretend it's constitutionalized somewhere somehow. That is my problem with a lot of these people who are talking. Jayapal doesn't want us to defend ourselves. She views us as a colonialist, imperialist regime. And just listen to the way that this guy, Jake Tapper, is asking questions of his guest, who they sought out and they booked, Bernie Sanders, because they know what he's going to say. Because he's an America-hating, Marxist, Israel-hating nut. Go ahead.
Constitution. Do you agree with her? Were these strikes illegal?
Well, what I do think is the president has a right to respond on an emergency basis to the disruption.
So here we have, that's really pretty interesting, Bernie Sanders correcting Tapper. That's how off Tapper is. President has a right to respond in an emergency situation. I'm sure there'll be 15 buts after that, but you understand. Of course he does. Otherwise, why would he be commander-in-chief? You would have the Speaker of the House commander-in-chief, or you need 2/3 of the House. They said no to that. It can't work. No. Particularly at a time like this when you have these sophisticated weapons. Go ahead.
On the other hand, he's got to get to Congress immediately. It is Congress that has the right to declare war, not the President of the United States. So I hope this issue gets to Congress immediately.
So that's a little confusing. He has the right to respond, but the issue needs to get to Congress so they can declare war. Okay. Anyway, go ahead.
Let's talk about the war that Israel is waging in Gaza. You are trying to force a vote in Congress that would direct the U.S. State Department to look into whether Israel is using U.S. equipment or assistance to violate human rights standards in Gaza.
All right, now I want to stop here, and that'll be it with this clip. The way Jake Tapper presents this, he brings this guest on, what he said preceding this is outrageous. Bernie Sanders goes to the floor of the Senate. He's introducing a requirement, legislation or a resolution, that they will not continue to support Israel if Israel's using weaponry that it buys from the United States to commit war crimes. So look at what's supposed and all that. Look at the suppositions and all that Israel's committing war crimes. Israel's not committing war crimes. Hamas commits war crimes. That's why they're called terrorists. Just look at this moral equivalency, how they've turned this upside down. This is sick. Okay, then what? And if Israel is using American weapons that way, then we're going to cut off support for them. So almost all the members, but not of both parties in the Senate, said, no, we're not going to even vote on that. So why would you bring Bernie Sanders on your show to do that? Because you agree with him. Now, I want to be clear about something because there's a lot of confusion. And I talked about this several weeks ago. When Israel gets aid to buy weapons, that money, the bulk of it, never leaves the United States or the U.S. Treasury. It's put into an account for Israel that the Department of Defense draws down to buy weapons from American manufacturers. Did you know that? They don't just say, here, Israel, here's $3 billion, go buy weapons. No. There's an account at the Treasury Department. The Defense Department draws on the account. The money never leaves the United States. It actually creates American jobs. That money goes to whoever the defense contractor is building whatever weaponry Israel needs. It never leaves the United States. That's the case, by the way, with Ukraine. Again, not all the money, but most of it, if not the vast majority of it, never leaves the United States. So those weapons are made in the United States. There's an account for Israel. So when Congress says, yeah, we're voting to give billions to this or billions to that, it goes into that account. That account is drawn from to manufacture weapons in the United States. They're either replacing weapons that they give to these countries, or they're having to manufacture new ones to give to these countries. So that's how that works. So it's not, oh, here's some cash, do what you want with it. And you can see where that actually wouldn't make sense. But this is never explained on television. It's never explained on radio. Just want to make that point. Now that's different than when you're just giving billions to Iran or hundreds of millions to the Palestinians. That money does leave the United States. So 16 billion, some in ransom, some in other funds, went to Iran 6 weeks ago from the United States with all the assurances that, oh, that won't happen. We have no assurances, for God's sake. And not only that, you had the Islamo-Nazi senior official saying, we'll do it with that money what we want to do with it. No, 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 no. Blinken says we can. No, we don't. And this little tiny, crappy, inbred monarchy, Qatar, the money goes to them and they're dispersing it. I got to do a whole show on Qatar one day. I really do. So at least patriots like you know exactly what Qatar is, what they're doing, and how they play both sides. And this is with Democrats and Republicans. It's repulsive. It's unconscionable how that works. So I wanted to point that out. So it did go to the floor of the Senate, and the Senate wouldn't even take it up. So why would Jake Tapper put him on? Because it's a mouthpiece for the enemy. Jake Tapper is a mouthpiece for the enemy with his moral equivalency BS, which he's done for decades now. And our media are filled with people like this. Look at Thomas Friedman. I'm embarrassed by this, to be perfectly honest with you, with these secularists who are born of my ethnicity but don't embrace the faith. And of course, they're not alone. They're not alone. Jayapal, I don't know what she is, and I don't care. AOC, Tlaib, I do know what she is. All the rest of them, there's these horrendous people in and out of the media. Just, I mean, honestly, what is it going to take? What is it going to take? We know what these barbarians did. We know that Israel's trying to defend itself in the most humane way any army has ever tried on the face of the earth. What is it going to take to stop this hate for Israel, hate for the Jews, this moral equivalency and so forth? I don't know what it's going to take, but it's spreading like poison in this country.
Want to see more? Sign up for LevinTV.